How would you like to make 105.8% return on your investments? Well, Kentucky's 3rd District Congressman Morgan McGarvey does. Yeah, Morgan McGarvey of Louisville, another big city Democrat in Congress, has made 105.8% return on his money. Folks, you cannot spend enough time out of your day, even if you were an expert in stock trading, to manipulate the markets and trade stocks to make that kind of return. Welcome back to Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. Now, we have a lot of current topics to cover today, and again, I'm not giving you the news. Well, maybe for some of you I am, but for others, an analysis and helping you to connect the dots and why things are happening the way they are. So let's get into it. Trump wins again against Lawfare. Now, no defendant or plaintiff should ever have to tolerate or contend with an openly hostile or biased judge. But that's exactly what Trump has had to deal with around the country. The one thing these political activist judges all have in common is that they are radical leftist Democrats. Their mental makeup and mindset inhibit their ability to be impartial. Recently, the New York Court of Appeals threw out Trump's $360 million fraud penalty issue sought by New York Attorney General Letitia James, who is now under investigation for mortgage fraud herself. But also Judge Arthur Engoron, who issued these penalties, needs to be investigated over his rulings, which were patently corrupt. Those orders were clearly violations of Trump's constitutional rights, and particularly in violation of the 8th Amendment, as the appeals court ruled and has just recently ruled. Attorney James and Judge Engoron knew this, or should have, and that type of violation is not the one that merely arises from a difference of opinion or an interpretation, but was intentional. And as the Court of Appeals said, it was excessive and abusive. They used very graphic terms insofar as how abusive this was and how wrong the judgment was by the lower court judge. And in terms of lawyers and other judges, are terms basically that other lawyers and judges have used before in describing these types of abuses, they say it is so extreme that it, quote, shocks the conscience, end quote. Now, this is where perpetrators like James and Engoron's conduct is so egregious and shocking that their conduct demands punishment and accountability. They should both be removed from office and disbarred. To make matters worse is the contrivance and the plot that further violated Trump's constitutional rights, and that was James and Engoron's placing of the penalty upon Trump so high, that is, putting the penalty so high as to remove his ability to afford access to justice. Let me explain this further so that you can understand the legal terminology here. When injustice has been done at the lower court level, those who have been aggrieved by an abuse of discretion of the courts or errors in the application or interpretation of the law, the aggrieved party has a right to an appeal. However, when you do, and there is a standing judgment against you, you have to post a bond. And James and Engoron wanted to place that bond so high, nearly $500 million, such that no insurance company would underwrite it and that Trump would not be able to raise the cash for the appeal. This is not just error, folks. This is criminal, metaphorically and otherwise. I'll have to say it again, because it is so appropriate for those who practice law that James and Engoron, what they did shock the conscience of any reasonable and just person. The New York Court of Appeals saw it that way as well. It was so egregious that not even the liberals on the Court of Appeals could stomach it. As I and other legal minds observed, we knew that an educated judge on appeal would have to favor Trump as the law demanded it. They didn't do it because they liked him. That is, the New York Court of Appeals didn't rule in Trump's favor because they liked him. They had to save their own credibility. Unfortunately, justice is slow in coming. And as the old adage goes, justice delayed is justice denied. Now, let me give you one other analogy. if your desire is to murder someone but you failed in the attempt, guess what? The attempt alone is a crime and will land you in jail. Likewise, what James and Engeron did in this instance deserves jail time because of their attempt to do injustice and deny Trump his constitutional rights. Don't forget, Attorney General James campaigned and promised in her campaign for Attorney General to get Trump. That should have been a disqualifier immediately. Punishment for James and Engeron is essential, not because of what they did was basically against Trump, but because it damages the judicial system and places the entire process into disrepute. I've said it 100 times and will continue to say, we need massive judicial reform. Now, don't forget that as I go through these podcasts weekly, I'm threading the needle for you to show you there is a pattern in what the Democrat left is doing, and it is not to your benefit. There is an authoritarian agenda and the end game that you need to know about and need to stop. Well, here is a recent article that I wrote called "The Political Realignment is Well Underway." You can fool some of the people some of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And guess what? This is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. And it could not be more appropriate than it is for today, particularly when addressing the Democrats' new crisis of where there has been a net swing of 4.5 million voters across the country away from the Democrats and to the Republicans. The Democrat left was so used to lying that they thought there was no extreme too far as to what they could say and get by with. They lost all credibility and trust of the American people. I need not go through the entire list, but let's just headline that list with, starting with, well, men can be women. They tried to gaslight you on that. And it simply gets more extreme from there, and you've heard it all. The people have had enough, and the people are seeing the corruption that is evident among the Democrat leaders. Remember, every Democrat lied about Biden's competence. But then, after he pulled out of the race, they all rushed to claim that they didn't know. Their lies are like compounding interest. They tell lies about their lies. So to come full circle, the American people have had enough, and there has been a massive registration shift to the Republican Party. And by November 2026, if trends continue, Pennsylvania will become a red state, having shifted 1 million votes to the Republican Party in just 4 years. That's just how extreme it is and how extreme the Democrat Party has become. Now, let's continue on with the most abused word in the Democrat left lexicon. It's called democracy. It is also the last word that they will have any clue about. The word democracy in the minds of most people connotes freedom, and the word freedom itself means an individual's autonomy and freedom from control of others. But as usual, the Democrat left changes the meaning of words, stripping them of their original substance so as to gain favor, such as the case with democracy. I spoke about this 10 years ago when the Democrat left started using the word democracy over and over again. I warned my Republican colleagues and conservatives that this was by design because they were trying to define in the minds of the Americans that they were the true protectors of democracy and freedom, simply because they used that word so much. Unfortunately, the right side of the political spectrum was slow to catch up on how the Democrats were deceitfully defining themselves in the minds of the Americans without adequate challenge from the right. The Democrat left would seek to speak about democracy and protecting it while at the same time proposing policies that would destroy it. And they sunk their roots deeper and deeper into the deep state that they were creating. This is nothing less than a shadow government that will continue to rule and influence regardless of who was in the White House. We are gradually emerging from that deception, but in the meantime, tremendous damage has been done. So the next time you hear the Democrats use the word democracy or being defenders of democracy, just remember that their words do not match up with their conduct. Being the great projectionists that they are, Just know that every time the Democrats use the word democracy, that should be a signal to you that they are doing just the opposite and that they are not to be trusted. Now, some people say that I'm always attacking the Democrats. Well, it's like having to make a choice between curing a headache or cancer. One is deadly and the other is temporal. And those who know me, particularly in the Republican Party, know that I spare no feelings there either, and have written much on their failures to combat the cancer that is the radical left. Now let's focus on treating the cancer. And I have an article out entitled, "I Told You So." The abnormal Democrats, which is redundant, have been told to start acting normal and using normal words. They were told this by their own advisors. In a recent Breitbart News article, it was reported that the Third Way, a leftist think tank, which is incongruous, as leftists don't think and can't think, at least in a syllogistic way, released a memo calling on Democrats who are opposed to Trump and MAGA to stop using words and phrases ordinary people would never dream of saying. Folks, normal people don't need think tanks to tell them how to talk. The Third Way's advice contains several implicit admissions. The first one is that the Democrat left is not normal because normal people are naturally authentic. Polls show that the public do not see the Democrats as authentic and now seem to need coaching on how to be normal. Imagine that. Secondly, that which is abnormal can't make itself normal. That's like lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps. And third, the terms and words the Democrat left has been using were meant to deceive you. In other words, they, the Democrats, are liars. Here are some examples. Birthing person or inseminated person instead of for mother, or unhoused for homelessness, or undocumented person for an illegal alien, or justice involved or involuntarily confined person for the incarcerated or jailed, or how about this, democracy for authoritarians, who they really are. Of course, we are familiar with how the Democrat left tried to force you to use different pronouns. And lastly, the Third Wave's advice to the Democrat left was not designed to make the Democrats better or normal. It was designed to only make them appear that way, so as to cover up who they really are. Folks, they're frauds. Now, remember how Vice President candidate Tim Walz tried to appear as a normal man by pretending to work on his truck? Or how about California Representative Swalwell videoing himself working out? Folks, normal men don't do that. Or Senator Schumer of New York pretending to be cooking out on a grill with a raw hamburger with cheese on the top. Tell you what, I won't be eating at his house. The Democrats are always gaslighting you and trying to get you to believe they are something they are not. And that would be honest, red-blooded American patriots rather than the God-hating, hedonistic authoritarians who are undermining our constitutional freedoms so that they can stay in power permanently. What Republicans, conservatives, and other normal groups around the country have now realized and have been calling out is that the Democrat Party is not the Democrat Party of the past. It is controlled by the radical left, and that is who represents them in Congress. It has taken the lazy voters a long time to realize this, but they finally have, and that is why you have seen 4.5 million net shift from the Democrats to the Republicans in registration in states around the country. One last observation is the word communist is now a term that is frequently used and associated with and to describe Democrats. And you know what? You hear little pushback from the Democrats because guess what? It's an obvious truth. And after all, their mayoral candidate for New York City is a communist, and all his proposals and the things he says come straight from the Communist Manifesto. They had another one running for mayor in Minneapolis until it became such a public relations negative that they withdrew their support for him. But that didn't change who they really are. Those on the right and normal people use real words that normal people use. The Democrats make up terms and change the meaning of words because they don't want you to know who they really are. Now, who would trust that kind of person? Well, someone not normal. Now, don't confuse retribution, and this is another topic, and this is very important, but don't confuse retribution with accountability. This is the latest thing out, particularly with regards to Trump trying to stamp out the lawfare that was used against him. Here's another perfect example of how dishonest the Democrat left is. The Democrat left and the deep state are in a panic over the coming accountability for their crimes, and that is why they are trying to confuse you with the term retribution to replace what is really going on, and that is accountability. You don't need a thesaurus to find a euphemistic term if you have done wrong. All you need is a Democrat, as they are masters at linguistics and twisting the meaning of words. In this week's headlines, it was reported that the Third Way leftist think tank told the Democrats that they were going to have to start talking more normally. We all know how the Democrats tried to get everyone to use different pronouns and how they describe their authoritarian ideas as democratic. Much the same is being done now as the Trump administration is uncovering the corruption of the Obama and Biden administrations. They are running for the hills, and in the process, they are using words like retribution in lieu of accountability. Remember, the word retribution has a predicate to it. Think about that. The natural and normal thing for anyone to ask when someone is accused of retribution would be, retribution for what? There is the key. When Johnny comes home running to Mama crying and saying, "Joey hit me," Mom would naturally ask, "Why?" Or, "What did you do?" The same goes for the historically dishonest Democrat left, who are accusing Trump's investigations as retribution. Well, to them, they need to be asked, retribution for what? I've not yet heard anybody ask that question of them. Now, this is what irritates me. I've yet to hear a Republican or conservative commentator ask that very question, which should be axiomatic. You see, I do go after the Republicans, and I call myself an equal opportunity criticizer. The Democrats can't answer that question because they would have to say what they did to deserve it. But the Democrats have not had to admit anything, as no one on the right has asked that very simple question that begs to be asked. This is what makes me crazy with those on my side of the political spectrum. Folks, when you hear the Democrats accuse the Trump administration of retribution, ask the very simple question and then counter it with, "It sounds to me that you are avoiding accountability." If the Dems did nothing wrong, then they have nothing to fear. However, as the evidence is coming out, they have everything to fear, all the way up to the crime of treason. Don't let the accusation of retribution stop the process of accountability. We need to clean house and put those guilty of crime in the big house. Make the Dems answer the question. Now, here are two quick Kentucky issues that do have national implications. Our leftist Democrat Governor Beshear, who plans to run for president, has a lot to answer for. Just recently, there is a scandal of 2,300 driver's licenses with money being exchanged under the table from, of all groups and people, illegal immigrants, to obtain their licenses in order for them to get their licenses. This news broke in Kentucky last week, and of course, if you have a driver's license, it makes it much easier for you to vote illegally as well. Thank goodness for a whistleblower who blew the cover off of this scheme and the illegal conduct. But I'm sure that Governor Beshear will have a lie to cover this up, just as he is trying to take credit for the good things that are happening in Kentucky, not as a consequence of his governance, but rather the supermajority of Republicans in the Kentucky Senate and House. What Beshear will not tell you is that all of the policies that have brought success to Kentucky of late have come from the Republican legislature. And they are the same bills and legislation that he, Beshear, vetoed. Fortunately, Beshear and his vetoes have been overridden more times than all of Kentucky's past governors combined. He's been a lame duck from the very beginning. Beshear has not been running the state, but rather the Republican legislature has. However, getting back to the under-the-table payments for the illegal immigrants to obtain licenses shows a failure of government oversight in our municipal governments. Hopefully, we will see our legislature tighten the financial screws on these liberal-dominated cities until they get their houses in order. But until then, don't look for any answers from Governor Beshear, and don't even ask, because he will only lie to you as he did in every one of his campaign ads for his re-election, which has been documented. Now, finally, here's another problem, which is not just for Kentucky. How would you like to make 105.8% return on your investments? Well, Kentucky's 3rd District Congressman Morgan McGarvey does. Yeah, Morgan McGarvey of Louisville, another big city Democrat in Congress, has made 105.8% return on his money, according to the January 7th, 2025 analysis as published in the financial technology company Unusual Whales. Folks, you cannot spend enough time out of your day, even if you were an expert in stock trading, to manipulate the markets and trade stocks to make that kind of return. You have to have special information, and trading on that kind of information is illegal. Just ask Martha Stewart. Let's assume McGarvey did spend a majority of the working day trading stocks and manipulating his investment portfolio, and really got lucky. He was elected to go to Congress and represent the people of Louisville, Kentucky. You didn't send him to Congress to get rich, much less engage in insider trading, which, in my and most expert opinions, is the only way to get that kind of enormous returns that we are seeing in McGarvey's portfolio. This ranks him in the top 5. Get this. This ranks him in the top 5 out of 535 members of Congress. Wow. I can guarantee you this. McGarvey is no genius, and he's certainly not a genius in this area. McGarvey is Kentucky's Nancy Pelosi in his leftist policies and stock trading. Folks, you can't get rich on a congressman's salary. As President Truman said, show me a man that gets rich by being a politician, and I'll show you a crook. Well, enough said. Now it's time for voters to get wise, to wise up, and to vote right. Okay, folks, well, that's quite a bit of news and analysis for this episode. Thank you for joining us for Jack's Corner. I'm Jack Richardson.